Hello, my friends, and thanks so much for joining us here for another episode of the Carolina Ultra Runners podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Lloyd. My guest today needs no introduction, but I'll still give him one anyway. John Kelly is one of the most elite ultra marathoners in the sport. He's one of just 20 people to finish the Barkley Marathons, and he's also one of just three people to finish the race more than once. After finishing in 2017 and 2023, John came back to Barkley this year and racked up his third finish. In addition to being a Barkley legend, John is also a data scientist, a husband, a father of four, and a Carolina ultra runner. Well, kind of. So technically, he lives in Tennessee, but it's right across the North Carolina border, and he does most of his running in the Boone, North Carolina area. So in my book, we are claiming him as a Carolinian. John, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I also I'm an NC State alum and ma married a Carolina girl, so to add to my Carolina credentials there.
You definitely qualify to be on the podcast, that's for sure. It's interesting, John, because when we were going back and forth via email to kind of set this up, I originally reached out and I said something to the effect of like, it's totally okay if you don't want to do it. You're probably getting bombarded with, interview requests after Barkley. And you said that's not really the case. Everyone wants to talk to Jasmine this year and no one wants to talk to John Kelly. What the heck?
Well, mostly Jasmine and a bit of Ihor, I think. We've of course got the first woman, which is huge and very much well deserved everything that she's getting, and it's giving her a fantastic platform as well. I actually told her right after the race, they're still standing at the yellow gate. And I said that, thank you. And now I won't have to do any podcasts. So yours is actually the first one I've done, other than Gary Robbins interviewed all five of the finishers, and he crewed for me this year.
So I can definitely see how, like you said, it's kind of a weight lifted off your shoulder in that you don't have to dedicate an hour plus to yo-yos like me to talk about Barkley. But I mean, be honest here, John. Is there a little bit of like disrespect you feel maybe? Like, hey, why does nobody want to talk to a three-time finisher here?
It's easy to it's human nature to let a little bit of that creep in, and you kind of have to remind yourself like, hey, wait, no, actually I didn't want that to begin with. That's not why I did these things. And that's true of pretty much anything in life. You think you're happy until you see your neighbor with something that you didn't even know that you wanted, and then it's human nature to just kind of say, well, I want that. But no, I very much have to remind myself that it was last year was in particular a bit overwhelming, and definitely a huge time sink with everything that I did. After my first finish, I got to go on Sports Center, and I think that was the coolest kind of publicity bit that I've ever had from it.
Yeah, I remember hearing you talk about that. Like, on the screen, it's like we'll talk about LeBron James right after we talk to this guy who ran this crazy race where there's books in the middle of the forest.
Yep. Yep. I've got a screenshot of that with he's on the lineup for coming up next.
Hilarious. So what made you want to come back to Barkley? You already had two finishes. Did you feel like there was unfinished business on your end?
I mean, I think this sounds crazy to most people I say this to, even to myself a little bit, but it's genuinely fun for me now. Like it's mostly type one fun being out there. I get to explore the woods right there where I grew up, but in places that I otherwise would never get to go. I get to welcome friends from all over the world to be out there and showing them around kind of my home turf. And so it's a really cool experience. It's I mean pretty much the only time that I'm kind of questioning things or when I go through those extreme sleep deprivation bouts where I can't keep my eyes open. Those are the only times where I'm like, wow, this is awful. I should just quit and go to sleep. Otherwise, I genuinely enjoy being out there and doing it.
And then what about, the pre-race stuff? There's a lot of Barkley starters and crew members out there who I'm sure are just chomping at the bit to talk to John Kelly for a little bit. You've got a lot of kind of chit chatting to do, I imagine, selfie taking. What's that like, kind of being the celebrity of Frozen Head?
Well, I kind of keep to my campsite, and people are pretty well focused on going over the map, going over the directions, trying to get that done. So I don't typically come to camp until about that time that all that stuff is put out and people are focused on getting prepared and getting to bed because you don't know if it's going to be that year where you have a 1 a.m. start.
So, with you having been to Barkley so many times now, are you able to sleep overnight, or is it still just nerve-wracking as the first time?
It's definitely gotten much better. I I'd say probably after my first finish, it got a lot better and a lot easier to sleep. And that's also one thing that Barkley has done for me is it has made it incredibly easy to sleep before races where I actually know the start time. Whereas once upon a time, even that was difficult. It's still a bit kind of your body's constantly on high alert, and so it's difficult to really get, I think, any kind of deep constant sleep throughout the night. Like at one point, I woke up at about midnight this year and looked up, and the light was on at sort of like the race HQ tent. And it hadn't been on before that. And I was like, oh, someone must have just gone up there. Are they about to blow the conch? Is it going to start? And kind of once you get that thought in your mind that you think it's going to imminently start, it's very difficult to relax and close your eyes and get back to sleep. Fortunately, I did. Fortunately, I also I slept through a car alarm that apparently went off about an hour before the conch. So a lot of people in camp got up, got ready, kind of an hour before the conch even blew this year.
And you were able to just sleep right through it because you're like, I've done this 1,000 times. I know what I'm doing.
Well, I also have the advantage of I'm not in a tent. It's, being so close to the race. I take my Explorer there and I sleep in the back of it, so I'm a bit more insulated from the sound.
Yeah, that definitely helps. So the conch was blown at 4:17 a.m. this year. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, that seems like, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking of that like that's kind of a relatively normal start time when you consider most other races or ultras.
Yeah, after last year, I thought the one thing that he might do was make a miserable start time, but that for me, I think it's even better than last year. My ideal start window is about 5 to 8 a.m. So that way you're guaranteed to have light by the time you really need it. Like you don't really need light on the first climb or the very, it's about an hour or two into that first loop where light becomes useful. But then you're still guaranteed to have light for a finish at the end of the race.
So let's kind of go loop by loop how things went down. Starting with loop one, how did it go for you?
It was madness, even more so than it's been on other years out there. There were a lot of strong runners, a lot of veterans out there, and I mean we must have had half field out there, probably about a third of the way through the first loop, and it can be useful early on, particularly if there are new sections of the course or new book locations, because you have a huge group of people fanning out and effectively grid searching and looking for the books, looking for the best lines up each new section. So it can be a help early on. We had one in particular that the book was in a hollowed out tree, and I think everyone looked in that hollowed out tree because it matched the description perfectly, and it was very obvious. Most of them actually are very obvious. But it was still a bit dark, and it had kind of fallen down in there to where you couldn't see it unless you shined your light just right and had long arms. I don't know if I could have even reached it down there. Um, so we lost some time there, but not as much as if we just had a few people. Once you get past that point where you've kind of tackled all the new sections, having a huge group is not so much positive because you're standing around and everyone has to get their page out, and you're losing precious time. If you lose an extra minute per book, that's an hour and 15 minutes this year. No one finishes at that point. And so once we got through the new sections, I pushed the pace a little bit going up towards the tower, and we went from a group of like 18 to, I think by the time we finished the first loop, we were down to about six of us. So that's a much more reasonable size. Kind of 3 to 5 people is what I view as a good group there. And we made solid time. We had a few small mistakes, but nothing disastrous. And that was kind of the theme this year is, just avoid disaster.
And it's crazy you were talking about just the impact every second has in a 60-hour race, which you wouldn't really think when you hear a cutoff like that. But obviously Barkley is a different beast. I remember reading, I think it was one of Gary Robbins's race reports. I think it was his first one, his first Barkley. And he was talking about how I think he was following Jared around and he was like just thinking in his head, whoa, this is 60-hour pace, like trying to keep up with Jared just because every second counts, even for a race that lasts that long.
Well, and that's also early on again trying to kind of spread the pack out a little bit so you don't have these huge traffic jams at the book, and people kind of leapfrogging each other where you might get there first, but then someone else gets the page first and takes off, and so it's, yeah, I mean, a small cooperative group is the ideal situation.
So as far as any runnable sections that there might be out there, how fast are you going on those runnable sections?
I mean, we're not sprinting by any means. You can't afford to really redline at any point in this race, and expect to last. But at the same time, whenever you've got something runnable, you've got to run. You can't. You've got to take advantage of those opportunities, and do what you can. And some of it, like the end of the loop is on a nice little trail and a road up into the campground, and there are a couple of sections that are on actual trail, and so when you hit those, you've got to run at a decent pace. I mean, at least what you would for a normal 100 miler.
Let's get into loop two. How did that one go down for you?
It went well. That's where we had our more reasonable group size. Um, we started off with Jasmine had dropped back a bit, but she was able to reel us in going up Ratjaw. She just made a huge push to get back up with our group because she, being her third year there, she recognizes the value of being able to do that. Um, so at that point, I think we were about six. There was me, Ehor, Damien, Sebastian Raycon. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Tour de Glaciers champion, Maxime, who won the Barkley Fall Classic, and then Jasmine joined back up with us. Unfortunately, as soon as she caught up, I made probably my biggest mistake of the race and kind of took us off the wrong direction on one of the descents. But there again, that's where the key is, avoiding disaster. And so, you've got to be able to, when you go wrong, quickly recognize that you went wrong and know how to fix it. And so, I still, even all the loops, I think I'm up to like 20, 27 loops that I've done out there, but I still make small mistakes. And the key is to recognize those quickly and not let it just blow up into some huge race-ending disaster the way that it so easily can. And so, I never get lost out there. I always know where I am, even if where I am is not where I want to be. And so we corrected that. We kept moving uh, really well together. Hit the new section well, and I think that we were pretty well um, without any sort of big mistakes for the rest of the loop. So we finished, I think, comparable time to what I've finished loop two in on my other finishes. Um, and we're in a great position to start loop three. We also had the advantage of with the start time that we didn't really have any night loops. Pretty much all the loops were split about half and half, day and night, which is pretty good for again kind of avoiding those epic disaster loops that can finish your race early.
So when you're at this point in the race, you've got two loops down. You've still got a good ways to go, but I imagine you're thinking in your head using that data scientist brain of yours, trying to kind of do the math, figure out where you stand, how likely a finish is. Are you thinking in your head like, I've got X% chance to finish? Were you thinking those thoughts, and how confident were you that you'd get a finish after two loops?
Well, there's still tons of time for something to go wrong, and so I'm not really thinking of it in terms of probability of a finish so much as I'm thinking of it in terms of what's my remaining buffer. And so, I kind of start each Barkley looking at it as I have this time buffer, this bank that I can use for uh, mistakes, sleep, terrible weather that rolls in. I mean, any number of things that can happen. You're basically eating into that buffer, and you can't let it get to zero. And so we were definitely in a good spot as far as that goes. Compared to my first when I finished the first time in 2017, and we had a 1:42 a.m. start in horribly dense fog, and I mean we made some really bad mistakes starting out on loop one, and we basically our backs were up against the wall already just a few hours into the race. We pretty much used our buffer. So we were still in a good spot at this, where, if we could survive a few mistakes, or if we didn't make any mistakes, maybe we could actually get a little bit of sleep, and, have that luxury going into the final loop.
So walk me through your interloopal periods for, in between loops one and two and in between loops two and three. What do those look like? How much time do you spend at each of those?
One and two, I don't think I sat down between those. It was maybe 5 or 6 minutes. It's just um, throw a bit of food down, swap out my pack, and get going again, really. Um, that's pretty much it. I'm highly reliant on my crew, which again was scary this year, to have my pack ready and for everything that I need to be in there. And those are valuable minutes. And so not everyone gets out quite as quick, but the loop in either direction starts with a long climb. So kind of the anyone who takes longer in camp and wants to retain the benefit of being with the group, that they pay the penalty of having to push on that first climb to catch up. Um, Loop two and three, I might take a little bit more time. I think I sat down. I think that's actually when I changed shoes and socks this year. I had a bit of I, I wore KT tape on my ankle. I've had some issues recently rolling my ankle. Whether it's placebo or not, it seemed to help. There were a few times on Especially those first few loops. My ankle was hurting on descents, and it kind of started to roll over a few times, but never went far enough to do any damage. But in any case, that KT tape had kind of rolled up a little bit on top of my foot and created a pressure point that was really starting to hurt. So between loops two and three, I took the time to take care of that. Glad I did, as that pain went away pretty instantly once I did. I'd say probably 10 or 15 minutes before that third loop. And that one was also, we were starting loop three in the dark, if I remember correctly. And so, just a bit more prep, getting ready and heading out for that.
But just a little bit more. 10 to 15 minutes is still a very quick turnaround for a race like Barkley. It's impressive for sure. So how did loop three go down for you?
Yeah, and I mean, just on that turnaround, that's the thing with Barkley is this sort of arms race, really, between the race and the people out there that we're constantly learning better strategies, getting better gear, learning how to work together. And I mean, all of these things are improving what we can do, and Barkley gets harder to counter that to where, the relative difficulty remains the same. And so the whole like people used to go down to their campsites between loops and do their kind of interloopal stuff there. My first finish in 2017, I just had my crew come up to the gate and did everything at the gate, so I didn't waste time going down to my campsite and back. And now that has become, the expected thing that everyone does, and you can't afford to give back these strategy improvements that people have learned over the years because the race has gotten tougher in response to those improvements. So now that whole area around the gate is barricaded off specifically for people to have that transition at the gate. Loop three went well. Just making sure I don't get my loops and my directions mixed up here. Yeah, so I don't think that we really made any big mistakes on loop three. At that point, it was down to me, Ehor, and Damien. Jasmine was with us for most of the loop and fell off a bit towards the very end. She was starting to have some trouble eating. Um, and at that point, I'm trying to think ahead, and I'm trying to get as much as possible the others to lead and navigate so that they can have a bit more experience and confidence when they go into that last loop on their own. It sometimes worked better than others, but I tried to stay within shouting distance to again kind of just keep anything from becoming a big mistake. And so we made it around that loop and in good time without any disasters. And we're in very strong position at that point. All of us, Ehor, Damien, and I came in together, but then there was also Jasmine, and then Jared and Greg right behind her as well. And so they ended up teaming up for loop four. So we basically had two strong groups out there for loop four, three each, very strong runners and Barkley veterans and both of them, and me in one and Jared in the other. So that sort of thing is what can lead to a year with a lot of finishers like we ended up having.
It's interesting, John, because you've gotten so good at this Barkley thing that you're at the point where you're the Barkley dad out there trying to teach the ones who haven't finished how to kind of take the lead out there. It's so wild to think, and the way you describe it makes it sound in my head like, man, Barkley sounds a little bit like it's kind of a little bit, dare I use the word, easier for John or like easy. That's not the case though, right? You're still suffering out there. Please tell me that's true.
Yeah, like I said, it's mainly the sleep that really gets to me at this point. And maybe I should start go back to viewing things more as a race out there and trying to drop and scrape people. But it's an advantage both ways. It's having Ehor and Damien there can correct the mistakes that I make. They can help keep me alert, keep me from falling asleep. And so there's and again that's become so much the sort of norm and the expectation at Barkley that Barkley's difficulty has increased to the point where it's almost a necessity. And so for me, the I guess the key thing is just the confidence and the knowledge, like knowing as long as we're here and we do, get to this point by this time, then we're fine. And I don't have that constant anxiety of are we going to make it? Are we going to do okay? And that like on loop five, Greg and I kind of leapfrogged each other a few times, and we didn't stay together or work together any on that loop. But at one point, he asked me, "Are you confident of the finish?" And I said, "Well, yeah. If, as long as I get this new section, this next book, okay, then yeah, no problem." And so I don't constantly have that racing through my mind, and I think that's maybe what makes it a more enjoyable experience for me now is just not having that constant stress and anxiety both before and during the race.
Very interesting.
I just wish I could stay awake. If I could just, like Igor, the guy doesn't need sleep, it seems like. I don't know how he does that. And some people can keep going and they hallucinate. I never hallucinate. It's like athletic induced narcolepsy. I cannot keep my eyes open. And it's miserable. It's the one thing that I just I wish I could do something that, I can't train that or improve it. It's just how my body responds to sleep deprivation.
It's crazy though. I mean, that's how most people are, but you did mention Ihor out there. Seeing the video of him finishing, touching the yellow gate there is just wild. The dude looks like he just finished like a 5K jog.
Yeah, everyone kind of shows things a bit differently as well. I tend to not mask how I'm feeling during an ultra at all. I think Ihor remains very stoic, no matter how he's feeling. Uh, I will say that he never seemed to have a low point. Like I'm sure he did, and he's uh, there were a few times he struggled on nav. There was one point where he dropped back from us on a climb, but it turned out he just had to stop and use the bathroom. And so again, but the lack of needing sleep is amazing. Like I said, I have trouble staying awake when I get to that point. Damien seems to have trouble thinking coherently when he gets to that point. And Ihor just seems to somehow not get to that point. It's maybe maybe it's youth. I don't know. I'm getting to that point now where it's funny. The group that we had, I think Damien's about a decade older than me, and Ihor's about a decade younger than me. So quite the spread that we had there.
Yeah, I definitely it's hard to imagine that Ihor, if he keeps coming back to Barkley, does not end up becoming some sort of Barkley legend like you, like Jared, like Brett. He just seems like the type of guy who can just keep racking up these finishes should the weather be in his favor and kind of other factors, but it's impressive for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how he does in adverse conditions, but I have no doubt that it's just fine, given where he lives and the weather I know that they have, and he soaks things up and learns so quickly. compared to other people that I've been out there with that maybe don't know the course all that well, Ihor would pick up on every little thing that I was saying just immediately and remember them all loop to loop, where I have all of these sort of like landmarks and mental cues that I have in my own head in the course. And he soaks those up, and he apparently just learned how to navigate really like in the past year for doing Barkley. Um, so yeah, it would be pretty incredible to see what he could do if he keeps coming back.
Yeah. Let's kind of circle back to loop 4. How did that go for you?
Well, that's where the sleep deprivation started first hit me bad. Um, and so it was just before dawn when we started up the first big climb out of camp, and it's going up chimney top. We were going the counterclockwise direction, so it's the one stretch of the course where you're on actual trail for a few miles, and in the counterclockwise direction, you're going up, and it's always the case for me. And this might be why I struggle more with sleep deprivation at normal ultras like Tour de Géant and the Spine, other kind of multi-day races, but ones that are on marked courses. Uh, so I mean, going up chimney top on that actual trail where my mind could subconsciously tell itself, yeah, you don't have to focus, you don't have to think, just mindlessly follow the trail. And it's sort of like if you find yourself staring at the the lane markings as you're driving at night, it's not good. And so those easy sections just lull me to sleep, and I was having a lot of trouble staying awake. That's also a terrible time of day for me. I just know my own circadian rhythm right just before and after dawn is one time a day when I really struggle. Late afternoon is the other. And so once we made it up that climb and started off the trail and down the other side, I was fine. No more sleep deprivation issues on that loop, but um, we made some mistakes, and again, that's where maybe you don't feel the sleep deprivation directly, but your mind just isn't thinking as clearly. Like there's no way around it, and so we made some mistakes. On really the first few sections and going counterclockwise, that first section of a counterclockwise loop to me is the most difficult to navigate. Both the downhills and the uphills are tricky. And most of the time the uphills are easy because you just keep going up and all the lines converge. And you get to the top and that's it. Whereas, the climb starting out in that direction, you're going up to a ridge line rather than a peak. So you have to hit that ridge line at just the right spot. And so, little ways, again, none of them were disastrous. We corrected quickly. But we kind of stopped and had a little pep talk at the prison and said, guys, we've got to focus. Um, no more, no more mistakes. We can't let these little things keep adding up every single section, or it's going to kill us. Um, Immediately after that, actually, is when my one of my Reese's eggs that flew out of its wrapper and went down the prison tunnel. So that was my last disastrous mistake there. Um, we started making good time from there. Made a slight mistake on the same descent we did on loop two, but not nearly as bad. Again, just a couple minutes, and then we pretty much nailed things almost all the way around until it started getting dark again. And we were going up a climb that should be easy. Well, navigationally, it's easy. It's meat grinder, and it's, I think, pretty indisputably the hardest physical climb out there. It's just steep and slippery and relentless. It never ends. You think it's going to end, and then you're not even close. But navigationally, it should be easy. You just get on the spur and you go up to the top. But it being at night with, again, sleep deprived brains, uh, this is one that I messed up, and it was, yeah, probably my worst or second worst mistake. But I kind of drifted onto the wrong spur and started heading up the wrong direction, and it took a big correction to get back where we were supposed to go, and that's another thing with the Barkley course is, if you go off it, the course follows the lay of the land. Like it follows the natural best line between each of these books that are out there. So if you go off course a little bit, it's a natural penalty. There's no shortcut that you can take. If you're not right on the course, then you're losing time. You're not saving it. So that was, that's kind of one of those things where we thought that we were in a great spot, could nap, could really prepare for Loop 5, and that ate into our buffer to where maybe we didn't have that luxury, and we lost Damien um, just before the end of the loop, where again he kind of, I think, started to get into his loopiness and wasn't thinking clearly. And so he dropped back a bit. Ihor and I finished the rest of the loop strong. Um, we had discussed preferred loop directions, and so my plan was to go out second. And so I went back actually after loop 4. I went. I knew that Ihor would be in camp for a bit. Damien had dropped back some, so I figured, if I were going to sit around and wait, I would make the most of it. And I actually went back to my campsite and took a legit nap, which is, I think that was the first time I'd been back to my campsite since 2017 at Barkley. So Ihor took care of some foot issues that he was having. He got back out there clockwise. I made it back to the gate just in time for Damien to start, and then it was real quick. I tapped, Damien immediately tapped, and then Greg was just a minute, if not a few seconds after Damien. So that was just, that had never happened at Barkley, where effectively two people, well, it had never happened since they started alternating directions, where effectively two people are starting the loop in the same direction at the same time. As Greg and I took off counterclockwise, basically at the same time. He sprinted past me like he was running a 5K up chimney top, and then I started having those same. Even though I got in a nap, I started having those same sleep issues going up that trail on chimney top.
How long was your nap?
Um, I think I told Gary to give me 20 minutes, 15 or 20, knowing that it would take me a few to fall asleep. So I'd say I got 10 to 15 minutes sleep there. Um, but then I got a few more minutes twice going up chimney top, where I just took a quick dirt nap and was on the ground for maybe 5 minutes each, and got a couple more minutes of sleep. Um,
Now, did you set an alarm on your watch for that?
I did. My alarm worked this year, so that was huge as compared to last year, especially this year, given that it was warm. and that my body wasn't going to wake up from discomfort due to not due to the weather, at least. So I had my alarm set, but generally, it's good to have that risk avoidance with the alarm, but your body's kind of keyed up and things are hurting, and it's very difficult to fall asleep for an extended period of time. When, at least for me, when you're in that situation, I think this is where Ihor and I are we are polarity kind of reverses here, where he might not struggle with sleep during the race, where and I do, but then when he actually wants to sleep, he's out. Like the 2 days after the race, when we were meeting for breakfast, and he had to be woken up after sleeping for like 10 hours to where he could make it there in time. Whereas, the first couple nights after a race for me, I can hardly sleep. I can't get any good sleep at all. And so, I at least have that knowledge that during the race, I'm probably going to wake up if I go down for a nap. But the alarm is definitely nice to have.
Yeah, it's nice to have, especially when you consider. I remember you talking about your 2017 finish, how you just fell asleep on loop five, and you said if it wasn't for the horrible weather, you probably would have stayed asleep. That weather was what woke you up, and that could have been the difference between a finish and coming back with all your pages and not finishing.
Yeah, and I tried to use that. That was really the first time I tried to use that to my advantage as far as falling asleep in bad conditions, knowing that they would wake me up. I've done that many times since then. But there again, maybe back then I was able to sleep a bit better. Maybe that's another youth thing, is being able to just fall asleep and be out, even in those sorts of situations where your body's keyed up and hurting.
I want to go back to, you said you talked about preferences for which direction you would go for loop five. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of wanted to help out the ones who hadn't finished yet by giving them clockwise. Is that right?
Yeah, I felt pretty good about my ability to finish in either direction. I felt a little bad, honestly, last year sending Aurelian out counterclockwise, but I just the way that things worked out last year and the timing and the conditions, I really wanted that clockwise finish, and kind of having that sunset uh, view going up the last climb up a mountain I climbed in my childhood, looking down at my family's farm. It was just perfect. This year, I didn't have that. I checked that off my list. And also, I kind of wanted a bit to have a counterclockwise finish. It's something that I haven't done at Barkley, and I figure, for if you have three finishes, at least one of them should be counterclockwise. Um, so yeah, they both preferred clockwise. I was, happy to give that to them, and to also have counterclockwise myself. And to be honest, I mean, again, that first section of counterclockwise is to me the most difficult nav section. And the funny thing is, it's also the one section that has not changed a bit. Not anything about it has changed in all the years that I've done Barkley. And so, despite that consistency, I still can't get it right every time. And I've learned, again, the key thing is I've learned how to correct myself and how to keep those mistakes within a small cone of uncertainty, instead of, I've gone on that section. I've ended up on a different mountain before, in previous years. And so I didn't want to force that upon either of them with us starting loop 5 at night, where that section would be even more difficult. And so, I mean, going down that first descent, I messed up slightly. I hit it pretty well, maybe a minute or two lost, but I come off the bottom of that descent and I look up and I see this. I told you that Greg had sprinted by me like it was a 5K, and I look off, just in a direction that no one should be, and I see this headlight coming back towards me. And so Greg had just completely botched that descent. And so it was, despite his quick start to the loop and despite my two naps going up chimney top, he was well behind me at that point.
So how'd the rest of Loop 5 go for you?
Um, Again, some small mistakes on those first few sections, which the really frustrating thing is they kind of mirrored the mistakes that we had made just one loop before on loop 4 going that direction. Um, but again, kept them from being disasters. They remained confident in knowing where I was, which is again such a key thing because you can lose a lot of time not only to actually going the wrong direction, but to stopping and thinking and trying to figure out where you are and if you're going the wrong direction. So I very rarely have to do that. I was still making good time all the way around. Knew that I was in a good spot for a finish, especially once the sun came up. Around that dawn time that I said is rough for me. I took one more nap that I felt confident if I got one more, that would last me till the end. So I got about 10 minutes, and as soon as I got up, I see Ihor coming the other direction, looking good. I had leaves caked all over me and everything from lying down, and so I figured he was about half an hour ahead of me at that point, which is where he finished. So he navigated that loop 5 on his own very well. Shortly, well, not shortly, but a ways after that, I saw Jasmine. Um, she was looking good, but said she'd made a couple mistakes. And I mean, to be honest, the time I didn't think she would finish at that point with where she was and how much time was left. She also said that she hadn't seen Damien, who started Loop 5 before, so I kind of knew at that point that Damien had been done in somewhere, whether he got lost or fell asleep or what have you. Um, and that's also about the time that Greg caught up to me again, and we had that conversation of it was just before we started the new section, which um, is really, I said that Meat Grinders is the toughest climb, but this new section I think is my least favorite section, which it actually replaced a section that used to be one of my least favorites. So they removed one of my least favorites and added a new one that is just it's very ill-defined. There's briars everywhere, and you're kind of snaking your way down this spur where like you kind of see, okay, I need to be going down this spur, but the whole thing is just choked with briars and dotted with cliffs, and so you can't go in just the right way you need to go. And so it's this constant kind of like zigzagging back and forth in the general direction that you need to go. And it's yeah, it's a rough descent. And so that's what I told Greg. If I can get this next descent, I'm very confident of a finish. And I got to the bottom again. We went our separate ways. I got to the bottom, and the descent went well, but didn't get to right where the book was. And so again, given the time that I had remaining, this is a lot of what Barkley is to me. There's any of these races where it's true all the way down to even like running a 5K. You can take a risk and go hard and maybe get have your best race ever, but you also risk blowing up at that point. And so in a lot of races, I'm taking the high risk approach. I'm going for broke. Whereas in Barkley, I feel like I have a much more kind of risk avoidance approach where I know, okay, I my goal is to finish, not to finish in a specific time. So I have this amount of time left. I'm still good. So rather than frantically running around looking for this book, risking missing it completely, and ending my race so close to the finish, I basically did a grid search. I very methodically kind of went down the creek where I knew it was, and it took me probably 15 minutes, but I found it, and so I was still um, I was still in a good spot for a finish, and I thought that that all of the tricky navigation was over for me at that point, so I didn't really have that risk remaining. And I thought I was still physically feeling great. I wasn't struggling with sleep anymore, and my legs were still doing well. So I thought if I push, I can probably finish in about 58:30. Um, and I made it to meet Grinder with that thought in my head. And then going up that climb, which again I've said is the most physically brutal of the course, and that's one reason. That's the other reason that and I think most people view counterclockwise is a bit tougher. Is you have to go up meat grinder rather than down. So I'd say that plus the navigation of that early section are the two biggest factors for me. And so I was going up meat grinder at the end of the race in afternoon sun, and most of the race was fairly warm, and so we were overheating a bit at various spots, but then trying to push up that climb at the end in that sun, and then on a warm afternoon, it cooked me. And so I got to the top, and I had to I just sat down for about 10 minutes. Um, it was probably another 20 minutes after that before my legs didn't feel like mush and felt usable again. And my kind of head and my stomach never did recover before the end of the race. So I went from thinking I could push my way in and finish in around 58:30 to just kind of coasting in on fumes with I think it was like 59:15 or 16, so somewhere around there. And so again, it was fun. I'm happy with that. I can think where I should I have pushed harder? Should I have done this differently? Should I have tried to scrape people? But looking back, it's an incredible experience to be out there, getting to enjoy those woods, getting to be enjoy that experience with other people, and then getting to be there and seeing most of them finish. I missed Ihor finishing since he beat me back to the gate. But I got to be there and see Jerry get his fourth finish, see Craig get his first, and then just that incredible experience of seeing Jasmine make it in with 99 seconds to spare when I mean basically everyone had just accepted she wasn't going to make it. And so that was incredible to see, and I'm glad that I got to contribute to that in some small way, and that to me is much more valuable than if I had been able to shave a bit off of my own time or do anything like that.
It sounds like you really valued watching other people finish this year, but as far as your own finish, I'm curious how you were feeling because I remember reading your race reports, call me Ishmael, this is my white whale that I'm going after, this Barkley Marathons, and 2017 you finally caught that white whale and the feeling must have been amazing. And now here you are, 2024, it's your third finish. Is the feeling even close to what it was in 2017, or is it just like, it's another Barkley finish? I'm John Kelly. This is what I do now.
You know, the finish itself, I don't know if you can top kind of the emotion and the sense of achievement and really kind of the relief of getting that first finish. Um, but the experience as a whole, it's just entirely different. And like I said, it's mostly type one fun for me, and I love being out there. I love being part of not only my other race, but sorry, of my own race, but of other people's races. And so I get to experience a little bit of that feeling vicariously by seeing these other people experience what I did in 2017. And so it's overall a very different experience, but I wouldn't call it a lesser experience. In a way, it's probably better actually overall. And I made a chart last year of kind of my level of obsessiveness with Barkley over time. And in those first few years, I think it was reaching an unhealthy, kind of all-consuming point. And then it dipped way down to where I had no motivation. And we see that so much with people who try to come back and get that second finish. And then I reframed everything in my mind in terms of why I'm doing this type of thing, and was able to get that level of obsession to a good level where it's not adding stress and anxiety and unreasonable time consumption to my life. Yet at the same time, I have sufficient motivation and drive to actually push through those later loops and still get a finish.
I will say, I think you and Ihor were in a good competition for best uh how do I say this? I guess celebration at the finish line. Ihor was looking really fresh and smooth there, and he had he kind of did like the airplane thing and kind of went back and forth right before he touched the gate. And then you were holding up three fingers like for your third finish. It totally reminded me of like, seeing photos of NBA players like after they win their third finals or something, holding the trophy like that. You just looked cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, well, I don't know if a video got this or not, but I actually did airplane arms as well. And
Oh, I
Igor
didn't
told
catch
me
that.
afterwards, like, I didn't know you were going to do airplane arms. I would have let you do airplane arms if I knew known that. So, I mean, another thing, just an incredible, nice guy. Just amazing to be out there with him and to have that experience with him. But when, he did the airplane arms, and it was kind of just a little one, and it would probably wasn't intentional. I went so far with my airplane arms that I think I was fairly close to falling over and tripping. So yeah, that's when I reeled it in and flashed the three to Laz as he was there, and so I was tied with Jared for 15 minutes before he came in and got that fourth finish.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Is there any banter between the two of you about number of finishes that you guys have?
No, I joked with him after the race about it, and he said that he's retired now from Barkley, which was I mean that's an incredible, awesome way to go out. It reminded me so much of seeing, like, because I think he originally thought that last year might be his sort of Barkley swan song. But to be able to go out on a finish like that, and 8 years after. his previous finish. It reminded me of seeing like Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods come back to the Masters when everyone has written them off as senior citizens and snagging one last title there. So that was awesome to see. And yeah, he says that he's done and said, well, you come back and get four and the number five. And so he's again very much out there cheering for other people to reach these milestones and achievements the same way that Laz is as well. People view him as this sort of sadistic guy that hates seeing people finish, and there's nothing he loves more than seeing people finish, but he wants it to be a real accomplishment when people do.
So do you have a goal to become the person with the most Barkley finishes?
We'll see. We'll see where it goes. I don't see me not doing the race again, but at this point, I'm not doing the race for the purpose of trying to become the one with the most finishes. I'm doing the race because it's right there. I live nearby again. It's basically my home course. I love being out there. It doubles as a visit to family. Um, and so, who knows how many more times I'll do it. I think as long as I'm able to reasonably look for a finish myself or help others get to that point, then I'm not wasting space out there.
You touched on Jasmine a little bit, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. You had a great social media post kind of outlining what you thought about her performance there, her finish. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it was just remarkable. There were so many points in the race where it would have been so easy for her to mentally toss in the towel. Starting with when she dropped back at the end of loop one. And even in my own head, I was kind of like, well, Jasmine dropped back. It was, it'll hopefully be another great year for her, but yeah, I guess she might not finish. And then out of nowhere, there she is pushing up rat gel and just reeling it. It's not, we weren't waiting for her. That's another thing to make clear. Like, yeah, there's teamwork out there, but it's not a charity. Like, no one's waiting around for you. No one's carrying you up the hills. Like, you got to do the work yourself, and you got to keep up, or you'll get left. And so she reeled us in. Um, and she struggled a number of other times with food and with other issues, and she just kept on, just relentlessly kept on. And again, on that last loop, I thought she would have to do things, she would have to move well and hit things perfectly from here, and did not think she would finish. And then when people said where she was at the tower, and then there's just a few minutes left, and we haven't seen her yet. And so to see her just keep pushing through each of those things, and I know that in her mind it was never a doubt. Like, she wasn't having those thoughts. Even she wasn't having that thought of, oh, well, I lost to the lead group, my race is over. Like, the same way that she never thought she couldn't finish Barkley because she's a woman. Like, it was all just in her mind, not even a thought. Like, she is going to keep going, she is going to keep pursuing it, and the outcome will be what it is. But she's never going to doubt herself, and she never did, and that's what enabled her to keep pushing when the odds were stacked against her, and see and for us to get to see that finish that we did. And she is, I got to know her fairly well in my time in the UK. She supported me on a number of my big efforts over there, including some sections that not many people could have done. So that was, it's not just about her and about her finish. She really views this as being much more than about herself. And I'm glad that, again, she is getting the opportunity and getting the platform to inspire people with what she's accomplished.
Plus, she takes the load off of you for these podcasts.
Exactly. I love it. Her and Ihor both. I don't know how much Ihor's had to do, but I imagine as the first Canadian, the first Ukrainian, and the winner this year, he's had his fair share as well.
There are some people out there who might look at Barkley now and say, well, gee, there's been 8 finishes in the last 2 years. Maybe Laz is getting soft. Maybe this race is getting too easy. But you kind of have a comeback to that kind of outlines just how tough this race is and how that's definitely not the case. Tell me about that.
I mean, we've had really strong fields the past couple of years, and so due to that, we've had a more finishers, but they've all been within like an hour and a half of the cutoff. So you compare that to earlier years where people were finishing with 5, 6, 7, almost 8 hours under the cutoff, and people were Ihor joked about doing a sixth swoop as with the cutoff extended. Back then, people were joking about doing a sixth swoop with the same 60-hour cutoff. And so what we have is not that the race has gotten easy, but that the field has gotten stronger, and so we're seeing the entrance, or at least the field will never be all elite for a number of reasons. One is the restrictions on how many loops can be done in the agreement with the park. The other is that Raz wants everyone to have that opportunity to get out there. But that elite section of the field is now coming from a very different distribution than it used to be. It's kind of like if you took a bunch of random people off the street and saw how many 3-pointers they could make, and then you took the Golden State Warriors and saw how many 3-pointers they could make, and you say, oh, the 3-point line, it's easy now. So easy, they need to move it back. And so, if the goal of the race is to have 1% of the population, or maybe 1% of ultra runners, be able to finish, uh, then if the people in the race are that 1%, then then if everyone finishes, that doesn't make the race easy. That just that actually makes it what it should be. But in addition to that, um, we just had nearly a decade where, after a major course change, there was a major increase in the difficulty of the course in 2014, after we had a year with 3 finishers followed by a year with 2 finishers. The only people that had finished in that decade were me and Jared. That's it. And so you have this pipeline of people that have been going out there. They've been putting in the time. This was Jasmine's third time. I think it was Greg's third time. Ihor's a cyborg. It was Damien's third time. And so you have this pipeline of people that are kind of building up their experience, building up their skills, waiting for that opportunity when things align. And so each of these past 2 years, we've had just fantastic weather. We've had good start times. And so that has enabled these people that were essentially lined up at the gate, ready to go. That gave them their opening to push through and get that finish. And so now we'll see what happens in the years after that, how many of those people return. There's likely me. There's no more Jared. And, I don't think we'll see Jasmine back. I don't think we'll see Greg back. Maybe Ihor will come back. But there's always those sort of ebbs and flows in Barkley where you have these people that are getting better and better and better, and eventually they're able to break through, and you have finishes. And then not only does the course get a bit harder, but those people dissipate and then you have to have these new people come in and start building up that experience, and that ability to finish. So, you know, I don't think the course will get significantly harder as a result of this. Again, this has been um, extremely strong runners working with very knowledgeable veterans um, in perfect conditions who have finished the past 2 years. And you don't want to design the race to where all of those things have to align for anyone to finish. So, kind of, I, maybe the course will get slightly harder. Maybe he will do something to prevent people from cooperating earlier in the race. Um, Above all, I think that he will have a more horrible start time, and I think we'll see, we're likely to see a return to the norm as far as Barkley weather goes.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think you summed it up perfectly on one of your social media posts where you said, "Why were there so many finishers? Because there were so many finishers." It just makes sense. The stronger the field, the more likelihood you're going to have there. I'm curious. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you're a father of four. Do your kids, can they comprehend this? Like, do they know how insanely talented and skilled their dad is for these Barkley finishes? Do they understand this at all, or are they not quite there yet?
I think my oldest is getting there a bit. I think they found me on Wikipedia in his class or something one day a few weeks ago. It's but there's not many adults really even the kind of this is a very niche thing, and within the niche we're all very knowledgeable and familiar with it. Let's be honest, to the average person, like that they call a 5K a marathon. Like a marathon is just a race that you run, and they can't really conceptualize the difference between a 5K or a marathon or a 100 mile or Barkley, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. And so I think that the kids see a little bit of that, and there are some cute pictures of my older daughter adoring Jasmine at the yellow gate. So that was cool to see. But above all, what I don't want them to see me as this superstar culture or even just Barkley runner so much as someone who's just getting out and pursuing his passion and doing hard things and not being scared to fail. Maybe their passion will be something entirely different, and that's fine. But I want them to have that same mindset and whatever it is.
Absolutely. Are you sentimental about any Barkley items of yours? Like, do you still have the orange beanie from 2017 or what was left of the grocery bag that you put on, pages from previous years, anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I have the toboggan and did you call it a beanie? Here you were questioning my Carolina credentials and you called it a beanie. That's a Yankee term here.
Oops.
Um, But yeah, I have those tucked away in a closet. I've got my pages in a box. The years I didn't finish, I'll often kind of offer those pages to people that support me on some of my FKTs or to kids that for some reason grow a fascination of the Barkley Marathons. There's one loop of pages at the visitor center at Frozen Head, so they they get used or stored. They don't just get tossed away.
So what's next for you, John Kelly? You talked about potentially going back to Barkley. Seems like a good likelihood. Have you ever thought about something like Appalachian Trail FKT, PCT FKT, something like that? It seems like that'd be right up your alley.
Yeah, the AT is kind of my holy grail of FKTs, but that one is really just you gotta find the time for it. I've worked at a startup and with a demanding job and with four kids, and I mean even sitting the FKT on it, you're out there for 6 weeks. And so, I'd want to get to a spot where I can afford to take that time away from work, make my family a part of it somehow, rather than just, saying, peace, I'll see you in 6 weeks. Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe one day for something that long, I figure I've got some years left to do that. That's one of the good things about the longer things get, the longer that you can stay competitive. And so, yeah, that one day, there's some other FKTs I have my sights on. This year, I'm actually for the first year, I think in like 5 years, I'm not planning any sort of big summer FKT, so that hopefully I can be in a better spot going into Tour de Chant and finally get that monkey off my back. I've never had a good race there. I love the race. I love the course. I love the people. And I just keep coming up short there for what I want to do. So that's my big focus for that's in September. I'm near the top of the wait list right now for Old Dominion 100, which is I think it's technically the oldest 100 because I think it was a 100 before Western States became a 100. So it used to be a really big race and has an incredible course record set back in the 90s. And so that would be a lot of fun to take a shot at that. So hopefully I'll get into that one. That's in June. And then yeah, just maybe some shorter FKTs and races around here in between.
Cool. John, you've been so generous with your time. Before I let you go, I've got a few rapid fire questions I want to run by you. So super quick questions, super quick answers, and we'll just kind of knock these things out and call it an interview here. First up, if you could choose your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Big Ed's Pizza and ice cream.
What's your favorite sport to watch?
To watch football. So well, yeah, or college basketball.
If you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Mm, that's a tough one. I mean, I think I just have to choose someone from my family, my grandpa, my grandparents, someone that, I don't have that opportunity with anymore.
Who's the runner you look up to the most?
I've never, I've always tried to avoid idolizing any one person because we all have our flaws, but I think that the person that I've taken the most from is Jared. I mean, not just in terms of Barkley, but in terms of just going out there and doing the adventures that he's passionate about and doing it in that sort of uh, low key, modest way that he does.
Favorite dinner to eat the night before a race?
Big Ed's Pizza.
Favorite post-race reward meal?
Big Ed's Pizza.
Favorite race you've run besides Barkley?
Um, well, I'd say Tour de Géant there, really. Again, I haven't had the performance that I want to have there, but the course is beautiful and I love the area. And I've got all the pizza and gelato I want there, right at the start and finish.
Toughest race besides Barkley that you've run?
Well, if you included some of my FKTs in there, it'd get a lot murkier. But otherwise, I'd say the spine.
Yeah, had a feeling that would be the answer there. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Mm, no, you'd have to cut the bun open on both sides. It's a wrap.
Favorite TV show?
I don't watch much TV. Well, I've before all of my races to kind of calm down and all my treadmill runs for like the past almost a decade now. I went through all the Star Trek series and I've finally run out. I made it through all of them, including Discovery, as painful as it was. But yeah, so I'm gonna need to find something new.
Favorite movie?
Uh, Gladiator,
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
right here. I chose it.
Nice. If you could go on vacation to anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Probably back to visit people and places in the UK.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, Wrapping up here, one last one. Not so much a rapid fire question. You can answer it quickly if you want, or you can take your time with it. Up to you. What's your best advice for anybody who wants to achieve longevity in the sport of ultra running?
Longevity is a tough one. I'd say that there are two big components to that. There's physical and mental, and physical. I think a big thing for me. Um, I've there are definitely those times when I say, "Oh, I wish I had the time and the resources to train like Jim and Courtney and put in these massive 120+ mile weeks." And I generally plateau at 60 to 70, and maybe I have a surge going for a week or two before a race. But I think that's probably a contributing factor to my consistency and the fact that I haven't had any significant interruptions to my training for 10 years now since I really started doing it. And so I would say to just remember what you can do with consistency. I think that we all underestimate, well, we all generally overestimate what we can do in the short term, and we underestimate what we can do in the long term. And so, just with consistency and keeping at it and steady progression of goals, you never know what's possible. And so, kind of always have that mindset of exploration, not only exploring places, but exploring what you're capable of. It's the whole thing is a process of discovery. And if you told me 10 years ago that I was gonna do any of the things that I've done, I would have laughed at you and thought you were crazy. And so mentally, I think that's a big part of it, just continuing to look at it with the sense of wonder and discovery, and not only getting to see some beautiful places, but in what you can do.
John, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but it's almost 10 o'clock. So I got to get to bed. I got to get you out of here. You've been so generous with your time. Thanks so much for joining me here on the Carolina Ultra Runners podcast.
Thanks very much.